They were star-crossed. They were golden. And they got it all back to the garden. They were 500,000 strong in the summer of 1969 at the Woodstock Music and Arts Festival in upstate Bethel, New York. It was a musical and cultural revolution that said, hey, we're a new generation, and we've got the numbers and the power to prove it. Hi, my name's Duke, and I'm an optician at a big box warehouse in Simi Valley, California. Simi Valley's over 3,000 miles away from Woodstock, so I was surprised when I found out that 3 of my patients had actually attended the famous Woodstock Music Festival. I had to ask them to tell me their stories, and I'm happy to say they shared them with me.
Hi, my name is Steve. I'm from Liberty, New York, not far from the site of Woodstock. In August, I think it was August 14th or 15th when Woodstock started, I had just turned 16 2 weeks earlier, and my buddy John and I decided we're going to go to Woodstock. I believe we hitchhiked to White Lake and then walked up the hill from there. My memory's still a little shaky, but as we were walking up, John was showing me his 3-day ticket for $18, and I said, I'm going to get a ticket once we get to the gate. Well, this is noon on Friday for a show that didn't start till 5 o'clock, and there was no gate. So we walked right in, and John was mad because that $18 meant a lot to us back in those days.
My name is Larry. In 1969, I was 18 years old. I was living in Greenwich Village at the time, going to the clubs and seeing all the up-and-coming rock groups that were playing. Heard about Woodstock, went and bought my tickets, and ended up going. So we got our tickets, and we drove up there with 2 cars, and we stopped to pick up Terry and Dave a little bit upstate, and then there was Richie and Steve and somebody else. I don't remember the name. So there was a few of us. We got up there. We drove as far as we could until the traffic had come to a standstill. So we ended up walking roughly 10 miles to the site. And of course, you didn't need tickets because the fence was there was no fence. And along the way, we stopped at houses where some people were selling food and drink, and I said, no way. So you just kept walking, and a few houses down, people were giving out sandwiches and water. It was fantastic. They were good people.
Hi, my name is Jeff, and in the summer of '69, I was 26 years old, and I was mountain climbing with my friend Brian Barry in the mountains in back of Taos, New Mexico. We left and hitchhiked up to the Grand Teton National Park and spent a bunch of time there, and we were climbing mountains. And my friend Brian, he had this new girlfriend. They both knew opera music, and so she didn't know how to climb, and we'd get her in the rope, and we were climbing, and Brian would sing these male leads, and then she would sing the female leads, and I started to think, you know what, I'm like feeling like a third wheel. And about that time I said, hey, maybe I'll go back and see that chick at whatever this festival is. And so Brian and Jill accompanied me up to Calgary, where I got a train which took me 100 miles out of Calgary, and then I started hitchhiking. And I hitchhiked back to Toronto and took a $17 flight from Toronto to New York City. And a drunk who was coming back from Ireland came and let me stay at his house that night. And the next day I started hitchhiking in the direction that I thought Woodstock would be in, and I got about 50, 60 miles totally in the wrong direction. But I went to a small train station, and there was another hippie sitting on the ground, and I walked over and I told him my plight, and he said, hey, just sit down, my girlfriend's coming, and in 15 minutes she and I will drive you to Woodstock, which is what happened.
So we walked in, John and I, we sat down about 100 yards from the stage, and they were still pounding nails in the stage. We didn't come with any supplies. We never even thought, nobody really knew what this was going to be, because it turned out to be something that nobody in the world ever planned. And they're pounding nails in the stage, and this is 5 hours. We're sitting around talking to everybody around us, and all of a sudden the announcer comes on and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, Richie Havens." And that's when I turned around and saw this mountain full of people, and I couldn't believe where I was at 16 years old.
Left on Saturday, got up there just around probably noon time, but because we had to walk, we arrived at the site around probably 2 o'clock, because when we arrived, we walked behind the stage and Santana was playing. Couldn't see anything because there were so many people, but we did mingle and walk around and hear the music.
Girls showed up with the car, and they did give me a ride to Woodstock. And the second we got there, I got out of my car, and I had a tent. I had all the mountaineering gear with me, and even freeze-dried food. I had a complete kit. I never got wet at Woodstock ever. I had mountaineering boots. I had what you call a cagoule, which is a device that goes down below your knees. That's a raincoat. I never got wet. So I set my tent up right by their car and decided to go look for the Hog Farm, because I knew they were there. And I started walking, and all of a sudden I saw 2 Hog Farm chicks, and I walked up to them, and they turned to me and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing." And they said, "Come with me." And that's how I started helping out the Hog Farm for the entire 3 days. And I helped feed people at the Hog Farm free food event. And the one takeaway from that was, as soon as people ate, we took their paper plates and cups and utensil back from them, because we didn't have any extra. There was no way we had to wash them, so it was kind of funky, but it worked.
Richie Havens came out, and amazing. It's still to this day, every time I hear a song of his, it reminds me of day one. That was the beginning of the whole world over there. And right after him, I really couldn't tell you all the groups that came on, but I do remember it started to rain. And there was a guy sitting next to us. He had a little tarp about this big. And by the time he opened up, there's 25 of us sitting underneath that tarp. Whips out a hash pipe, puts in a good chunk of hash, and we're all passing it around. That I remember. Don't ask me why. It got very electrical stormed out there, and they decided that they got to cut a lot of the electricity, so they brought on Melanie. They brought her on, and as the night, it came and went. Joan Baez came on. I don't remember exactly how the whole night ended, but what happened is at the end, we decided we don't want to sleep on this mud, so my buddy and I took a walk over to White Lake, and in front of a little drugstore / liquor store, there was a paved sidewalk. So we decided to sleep on that. Next morning, somebody decided to try to jump over a railing in front of the sidewalk, knocked the pole over, hit me in the head, and that's how my Saturday started.
We did have sleeping bags with us, which we spread out on the grass by the lake. And did I sleep? I doubt it very much. But we did rest, and music was playing all night. So we did get to listen to it. Again, couldn't see anything because you're so far away from the stage, but we were able to listen to it.
And so I was walking around, and I didn't really see much of the music because I was busy. I had a chance to sit and drink with the Grateful Dead. They didn't know who I was, but I drank a beer with them. There was a U-Haul trailer in back of the stage that just had ice and beer in it. So I did that. I wandered on stage a couple of times, had an Instamatic camera, walked to the front of the stage, took 3 quick pictures, and was so intimidated by that crowd that I couldn't wait to get away from that. Had a little conversation with David Crosby.
After waking up by being knocked on the head with this pipe, my buddy John and I grabbed a bite, and then we headed back up to the festival. There were so many groups that day, I really can't remember, but there's a couple things I remember. I remember Joe Cocker very distinctly, but the thing that really stood out in my mind, probably what I felt was the greatest one song of the whole concert, was Santana's Soul Sacrifice. I mean, the whole place was shaken. By then, everybody was comfortable because even though it had been raining and the rain came and went, we didn't know on Friday what this really was. We didn't know if it was going to get raided, get shut down. We didn't know about the police, but by now everybody was just at peace with everybody and having a great time.
You know, I like The Airplane, I like Creedence, I like Santana. Every group that I was listening to at the time was there.
My favorite set of the whole 3 days was Joe Cocker. Fantastic set. And I had a little story about Joe Cocker's tie-dye. I have a friend that lives in Bali now, but one day, about 3 weeks before Woodstock, he was in a store in the East Village, and he saw this tie-dye, long-sleeve tie-dye, and he said, I want that. And he went in and he told the sales girl, I want that. So she's going to go take it off the, whatever you call those things. And just then, Janis Joplin and Joe Cocker walk in, and Janis says, I want that shirt. And it's the same shirt, but my buddy nodded to the sales girl, like, you know, yeah, go ahead, let him have it. And that was the shirt that Joe Cocker wore during his set at Woodstock.
And the third day is basically a blur for me, to be honest with you. I slept on the ground. I don't remember if I had a sleeping bag. I don't remember who was what by then. I was in a daze, but I knew that I had to get back to work. I worked for my uncle at a hotel. I had a restaurant right at the foot of the hill, Grosinger's Hotel, and I would never hang my uncle up, so I knew I had to get back. I guess I walked into White Lake and took a bus. Again, I was 17 years old, pretty wasted most of the time, so I'm not exactly sure how it went. But I know that that's how it ended for me. I saw the acts on Sunday. There's a couple of songs that stood out, but I couldn't even tell you what they are.
Unfortunately, we didn't bring anything with us, so it was very difficult to stay. The crowds were enormous, 450,000 people. So unfortunately, we couldn't stay all that long. We ended up staying overnight, just talking with people and doing whatever we could to nourish ourselves however we could, and ended up leaving early Sunday morning. It took us quite a while to find the car. Like I said, it was about a 10-mile hike to get to the cars. Eventually we found them, and that was the start of the journey home.
And I slept there every night. I never went back to my tent. And finally I woke up Monday morning, and somebody said, hey, Jimmy's on. And so we rushed out there and saw Jimi Hendrix. And then it was over, and I turned and looked at the field, and oh my God, I'll never know how they ever cleaned that field up. But in the very beginning, we collected about 200 sleeping bags. And they were wet and kind of funky. And we took them to a cleaners that the Hog Farm knew in New York City and had them cleaned and then gave them out to homeless people. But it was just an absolute wreck. I walked back and amazingly, I found my tent. And what happened to my tent? I unzipped it and it was exactly as I left it. Nobody had stolen a thing from it. It was still there. And so I started hitchhiking and hooked up with some people who took me somewhere into the Catskills. And we slept outside and it was absolutely quiet. The night after, I'd slept with 400,000 other people.
I guess my favorite part would have to definitely be when the announcer announced Richie Havens, because even to this day, if I'm watching the Woodstock movie, when they announce Richie Havens, he comes on, I get a flutter. I mean, it just, everything, all the memories rush back. You know, everything else after that was a big blur. I mean, believe me, I enjoyed every bit of it. There was some, like I said, Santana, Soul Sacrifice, Joe Cocker, 10 years after doing I'm Coming Home. They're all fantastic, but I think really, really the thing that really gets me going is seeing hearing the announcing, ladies and gentlemen, Richie Havens, and seeing Richie come on the stage.
My favorite part of being there was just the amount of people all into the same music that I was into, and everything else that I was into, you know, be it drugs, be it the music, being the people. It was just fantastic.
Looking back on Woodstock is a little bit difficult for me. Not because it was 50 years ago or whatever. And I'm 83 now. So, but because my whole life, I never looked back on anything. I had so many wonderful experiences in the 60s. I was the luckiest guy because I wasn't a kid. This mother wouldn't let him go to Woodstock or the Monterey Pop Festival. I got out of the Navy when I was 20 years old with my whole life in front of me, and all I wanted to do was grab a hold of whatever I could. So I just went from experience to experience to experience. After Woodstock, I got on a hippie bus. I drove all over America for a couple of years.
I gotta tell you how lucky I really am. I just turned 16. And the only reason I was able to pull this off is because I lived in Liberty. I mean, I hadn't even started 11th grade yet, hadn't even gone to my senior prom, hadn't done any of those things, but because I was right there, I was able to go there and not give it a second thought.
When I got home, I had a decision to make. I know I was going to be getting drafted, and I had a decision of, was I going to Canada or was I going to go into the service? Well, I got drafted a week after Woodstock, and I went to the service.
Now, back in the 60s and the 70s, we weren't into possession and we didn't really save anything. However, I happen to have one really cool thing that was with me at Woodstock. And I made it all.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this rock and roll history as much as I did. I'd like to thank Steve, Larry, and Jeff for sharing their amazing stories with us. And I'd like to say to each and every one of you, peace and love, peace and love.